Somebody has to represent Wall Street in Congress, and right now that somebody is Gerald Nadler. But Jonathan Herzog wants to be the person to do that. When I say represent Wall Street, I'm talking about the geography, not the people, because most people who work on Wall Street don't live on Wall Street. Jonathan Herzog, welcome to the Young Turks. This is the conversation. We're glad you're with us. Tell us a little bit about the hill you need to climb. I mean, you're running against Gerald Nadler, obviously an entrenched Democrat, a part of leadership, someone who led the charge in impeachment against Donald Trump. Yes, this is an era of out with the old, in with the new. And tell me about the challenges and the opportunities in running in this race.
Absolutely. Well, great to be back, and thank you, Michael. Well, we're in a moment of a crisis on top of a crisis on top of a crisis. And the reality is, in this moment of police brutality, in this moment where more than 100,000 Americans have died from COVID, where more than 40 million are unemployed, where we've entered the new Great Depression, and we haven't implemented testing or contact tracing at scale, Congress has been on recess. And when they return to session, the incumbent, Congressman Nadler, co-sponsored the HEROES Act, which was a multi-trillion-dollar bailout of the largest multinational firms with crumbs, with a tiny fraction to bail out the people. And this is the same dynamic that we see in the district as you described, which is home to Wall Street, the world's financial capital, ground zero for the winner-take-all economy, for the market concentration of power. Nadler came and the House came back in session to pass a multi-trillion-dollar bailout. We have not learned the fundamental lesson from 2008, from the financial crisis. So as you said, we are facing this multi-decade incumbent who's really never faced a competitive primary challenge. But I'm happy to say in this moment, people are waking up. We recently won a federal lawsuit reinstating the primary after the entire New York State Democratic Party establishment tried to unconstitutionally cancel it using the pretense of COVID. And we just forced the first televised debate in the history of our district. So while these times are trying and challenging though they may be, we're well on our way to getting just the 15,000 votes we need to unseat the congressman by June 23rd.
Tell me a little bit about that challenge. I'm guessing here, I'm not putting words in your mouth, I'm guessing you voted for Gerald Nadler in your life, and members of the Herzog have as well. And you get in, that's how people get entrenched. But now that you have this challenge ahead of you, who is it that you're convincing, right? It's a very Democratic district. But it also requires some convincing, and it's tough to convince in the time of COVID, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is, but the reality is the structural crises we're facing, more and more and more people are waking up to them, where in the 10th district, before COVID, 1 in 6 people lived below the poverty line, couldn't meet their basic needs. And this is in, as you said, the most educated, liberal, high median income district in the country. But these institutional collapses, these institutional failures are unsustainable. And they're certainly trying at every turn to make it difficult for folks to have a choice, because that's the reality, is people here just really haven't had a choice in decades. And part of the solution, part of the way forward, is to offer a new vision for someone who's at the civil rights fights at the vanguard of this era. And that new vision includes a universal basic income. It includes a data bill of rights. It includes public financing of elections and a real substantive criminal justice reform. So people are starting to realize that we need real systemic structural change, and the same old just won't do.
You talk about universal basic income. Andrew Yang has endorsed your candidacy. How has that been important in terms of generating energy? As someone who was on the trail with him for months and months and months, I saw the energy around Andrew Yang, but it was also about his ideas. And how is that translated on the Upper West Side?
Well, this is a community that, again, deeply understands the civil rights fights and civil liberties fights of this era. By the data, actually, by polling, support for ideas like a universal basic income are much higher in urban liberal districts like ours. And now even nationwide, amidst the pandemic, Polling illustrates that upwards of 80% of Americans support some version of recurring cash relief, at least during the crisis. But again, this is the central contrast in this race. The congressman was on recess for weeks amidst this pandemic when the CDC director, the former CDC director, said if New York had shut down just 10 days sooner, up to 80% of all deaths could have been avoided. And then they came off recess to pass the single largest multi-trillion-dollar bailout since the financial crisis. I mean, this is the outrage. This is the unsustainable dynamic that is leading to the far left and far right populism, the false choice that we have to date. And in the 10th district, it has one of the largest LGBTQ populations in the country. And the LGBT community understands very personally, as I do, that the promise of it gets better is hollow without the promise of financial security in the case your community or family or state rejects you for who you are. And if you look at the George Floyd murder, the George Floyd lynching, this was downstream of a counterfeit $20 bill. We're in a country where before COVID, 50% of all people could not afford an unexpected $500 bill. And now tens of millions are unemployed amidst the new Great Depression. So this affects all of us, and people are waking up to that fact.
Yeah, and this, for people who don't know this district, as a fellow New Yorker, this was the bastion of what was liberalism, certainly when I was young, a very, very long time ago, and even before that, if you can believe there was a before that. But it is also now a wealthier part of the city than it was at that time. So tell me, Jonathan, how you cater to voters who really have been Nadler supporters, even with their eyes closed. How do you get that? That's really what I'm so fascinated by, the one-on-one with a voter who's voted for Nadler for a long time and thinks, why would I switch ships at this point? Switch horses, I guess is what you're supposed to say, mixed metaphor. But what does that voter say to you?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing I say and I hear is, as you said, Michael, I am you and I have been you. I am of, by, and from this district. And the reality is we just haven't had a choice. But one really critical component, Michael, is this is one of the most Jewish districts as well in the country and has been on the front lines of the rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes. Hate crimes in New York rose and doubled last year alone. 2/3 were anti-Semitic. And if you look at the words and writings of historians and sociologists of this moment, what they call out is that in moments of social insecurity and instability, when institutions and systems collapse beneath the weight of their lives, people search for a scapegoat. And when I looked at the data, it's not just that for the past 2 decades, the American Jewish community has looked upon the global surge in anti-Semitism with some degree of condescension, even as our brothers and sisters on the front lines in South Brooklyn, those who are visibly Jewish, have been on the front lines of hate crimes for years. It's that the last time we entered a Great Depression, what you saw in Germany in 1928 was a 1-to-1 correlation in a democratically elected government between the rise in unemployment and Nazi seats in the Reichstag. So this is no joke. This is the fundamental reality of our time. And what's particularly tragic is what our Democratic Party leaders have done in the wake of this crisis is, after Joe Biden warned that President Trump might use COVID as pretense to postpone the election, the entire New York Democratic Party establishment, what they did was try to cancel the primary. And we fought in federal court for weeks to restore our constitutional right to vote for New Yorkers. So it's time for a change, and I hear you. We haven't had that choice before, but now we do.
Let's talk quickly. Joe Crowley, a member of the establishment, lost in 2018. Congressman, kind of asleep at the wheel on that race and ran into a juggernaut. You have now Eliot Engel with a significant primary, someone who's been in that delegation for a long time. Peter King resigning because even on the Republican side there was talk of a primary to him. Jose Serrano on the Democratic side, the same thing. And now here's Gerald Nadler. Leadership. Is there a kindred spirit kind of thing happening with some of these candidates who have challenged the delegation. I think of Espaillat, the congressman who took Charlie Rangel's spot. Ran against him, lost, and then Rangel retired. Is there a kindred spirit feeling you have with some of these challengers that make this more important?
I think certainly this moment of, again, crisis on top of crisis on top of crisis, it just calls for all hands on deck. And our congressional leadership has been asleep at the switch. And Yuval Harari told us last year, Michael, he said, whoever controls the algorithms is the government. We're talking about a federal government that defunded the Office of Technology Assessment in 1995 and has been flying blind and asleep at the switch. A federal government, our legislators who still use floppy disks, may not even use email or have apps on their phone. And this is a critical component of having 21st century solutions to 21st century crises. So certainly in this moment, people are waking up all across the board that this is unsustainable and it's time for a change.
I use email. I don't have floppy disks, and I have apps on my phone. So I feel like I'm, really ahead of my time. Jonathan Herzog, you are the embodiment of why we should never, ever cancel elections in this country. There are ways to hold them. It's important to get everybody's ideas out there. If the hill is too big, then the hill's too big. But you have to be able to hear from everyone. Thanks for being on the Young Turks today. Good luck next week in your primary, or in 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks, or less than 2 weeks. And we'll come back and visit with you again. Okay, Jonathan?
So appreciate it. Thank you so much, and take care.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.